Hello, and welcome to The New Normal, a weekly interview series. I'm not Brian Morrissey, your usual host and our editor in chief at Digiday. My name is Tim Peterson. I'm a senior reporter at Digiday. And today we have Kerel Cooper and Erik Requidan, who are hosts of The Minority Report. And we're going to talk about the podcast they put together and also just their experiences in the ad tech industry. So, start off, before we welcome Kerel and Erik into it, I want to talk to you a bit about Digiday Plus, which is our membership program. It's a great program. If you pay for a subscription, you get unlimited stories, so you get around our paywall. You also get exclusive access to content as well as research that we put together, our live digital events such as the Plus Talks that we host every Tuesday, as well as reports and guides that come out of the various events that we host, including our virtual summits that we are doing since we can't be doing physical events because there is no real world right now. For tuning into the new normal, we'd like to thank you. And so normal viewers save 20% on a Digiday Plus subscription. You can just use code TNN at checkout for that. We hope you do, because we work very hard to try to provide as much informative content for you as possible to help you do your jobs. Okay, and now I think we can get started with today's conversation with Kerel Cooper and Erik Requidan. Kerel and Erik, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Thanks for having us, Tim.
Absolutely, thanks for being here. So, want to talk about the Minority Report podcast, but I'd love to start by just hearing from each of you, just your own personal backgrounds, and then we can get into talking about the genesis of the podcast. Kerel, let's start with you. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in our industry, just call it ad tech, martech now for about 20 years. I grew up in our industry on the publisher side. Most notably, I spent close to 8 years at Advanced Digital, local news publisher, running operations and partnerships. But for the last 5.5 years, I've been at Live Intent, currently the head of marketing at Live Intent.
Erik, what about you?
Yeah, so hello, everyone. My name is Erik Requidan. I am currently the CEO and founder of Media Tradecraft, a firm that I founded at the end of last year. And my background is fairly similar to Kerel's in starting in publishing and media. I started my career in sales, eventually moved into operations and then product and then tech. And then over the past almost 10 years been a hybrid of kind of all of those things, and have spent about the last 7 years really helping publishers to be as prepared as possible, work with buyers, and bring direct exclusive ad management services to them, which is exactly what the firm that I founded does at this point. So that's a little bit about me.
Got it. And so you guys got your day jobs, but then you also have this podcast that you do, the Minority Report. Started, a little over 2 years ago. Kerel, what's the origin story behind this podcast?
Yeah, so Erik likes me telling this story, but it's a pretty simple story. Erik called me up one day. I remember I was leaving the office, heading home, and he basically said, "Hey, I have this idea. I want to create this platform for people in our industry that are people of color, women, LGBTQ community, to really tell their story, right? And it being less about the day to day of our industry, but more about really understanding who that person is, their background, their culture, how they grew up, how they got into the job that they're in, advice for anyone." And I told Erik at the time, I was like, "I love the idea. It's a great idea. There's nothing out there like that at the time." And he said, "Great, I got another question for you. I want you to co-host it with me." and and of course, I agreed to it and really jumped on it. And I would say probably after about 2 or 3 more conversations with Erik, we decided that the podcast was the best platform for us to utilize. We decided on the name Minority Report podcast. We called up one of our good friends in the industry, Steph Laser, who's at News Corp, to be our first guest. got together one night, opened a couple of beers, and hit the record button.
Yeah,
and
that's
that
right.
and that is really the story. It's not any more complicated than that.
Got it.
Yeah.
And I mean, since then, you guys have really like ramped up the publishing cadence where it looks like you guys are doing about an episode a week now. How has the podcast evolved over these past 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Crow.
Oh yeah. So yeah, you're right. I mean, I think when we first started out, we said we were going to do about 2 episodes a month, right? Because as you said earlier, both Eric and I are super busy. I'm a senior leader at my company. Eric runs his own company, but also to add to that, right? We are both married with kids at home as well too, right? So it was really a passion project and really trying to find the time to be as efficient as possible with it, right? So we started out doing 2 episodes a month, right? And then once the pandemic hit, since we were both home, we just said, you know what, why don't we take advantage of the extra time that we have because we're not commuting, we're not traveling for business, so on and so forth. And now we're doing 1 episode a week. And so it has really grown. And actually, just yesterday, we recorded our 45th episode.
Wow. Okay. And then Eric, so this is kind of your idea. You brought it to Kerel, and not only were you just like, yeah, let me check if this is a good
Yeah.
idea, but also, okay, he said it's a good idea. He should be part of it. Then, why did you see this as something where you wanted to, have two hosts as opposed to just do it yourself?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I thought about it a little bit. Kerel and I had been friends already in the space, and as leaders at the companies we were at the time, we would often be in a lot of really important settings and environments in the industry, and we'd look around, and we were the only guys that looked like us. And I remember thinking, okay, if we sort of do this, or if we've got this idea, it sure would be a whole lot easier to have great content, even guests, where we could create a format that would be interesting to an audience. Obviously, have a wider network of folks that we could reach out to. But in the end, I think it actually flows the best possible way with more than one host. And I'm so happy that Kerel said yes. I'm so happy that our first guest said yes, because if you rewind 2 years ago, while a lot of what we're going to talk about sort of today, and the reason that we created Minority Report podcasts, the discussion wasn't really sort of front and center. So when we think about the guests who came out with their courage, and I think about all the things that we talked about early on, that was pretty brand new to be doing that. And like I said, I'm so delighted that we were able to get it off the ground and be where we're at today.
Right. And it seems like with the idea of the podcast being about diversity, and diversity from at a very wide level, it's women, it's black people, it's people of color, it's members of the LGBTQ community. It seems like having two hosts who have different backgrounds would be valuable there. Kerel, did you see that? Like when you were talking with Erik about that, did you see, oh well, I have my experience, but then Erik will have a different experience than mine, and the guest that we bring on will have an even different experience than ours.
Yeah, definitely. That definitely saw that, and also too, right? Eric has a great network, and so do I. And our networks, they overlap, but there is also parts of our networks that don't overlap, right? So having two different hosts that could, introduce new people that maybe I will introduce someone to the podcast that Eric doesn't know, and vice versa. And so that I think that combination is really why we thought it would be good to go at this with two hosts.
Got it. And then Kerel, I'll start with you. How did your own background and your own experience, how has that informed like the conversations that you're having on the podcast, the people you're bringing on, what you want the podcast to be about?
Yeah, I think Eric touched on it a little bit, right? It just the feeling of there aren't a lot of people in the industry that look like me, right? And so I've spent a good portion of my career where I'm either the only one in the room or the highest ranking Black person at the company, right? And that comes with a level of pressure. That comes with also, I think, a level of stress as well too, right? Added to the everyday roles and responsibilities. And so I think thinking about my own personal career journey as well, and wanting to sort of be more transparent with respect to my own story and share that with others, right? I think that definitely was sort of the reasoning behind it. And again, just going back to the theme of the podcast, right? This is not about viewability. This is not about identity from the sense of, like, what I mean, the everyday things that we talk about, right? This is
No
about
death of the cookie conversation.
yeah, the cookie conversation. It is about identity, but not third party cookies going away. But it is about getting to know the individual, and really creating a catalog of content for the next generation that's coming to reference, right? And I think one of the things that Eric and I are certainly proud of, like I said, we just recorded our 45th episode, and I think over the last couple of years we've amassed one of the sort of largest catalogs of diverse people telling their story in our space.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
Eric, so as Kerel mentioned and you mentioned before, it's about, there aren't that many people who look like me in this
Yeah.
industry, raising, our voices, raising the voices of others who may, feel that way as
Mm,
well. I'm also curious, like, given that, like, whether you saw specific topics or issues that, were really important to highlight
sure.
with using the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, sort of about my own career, and I couldn't find a place where there was kind of inspiration for others, and I think about inspirational figures in my life, and my family, my grandparents, my parents, and then I realized, within our industry, it was really sort of hard to find voices of inspiration or people telling their own personal stories, where someone could say, hey, I come from a similar background, right? Or I struggled with the same things, or I thrived because of some similarities that we may have. So when I think about my own career, and how I climbed, I had a number of people that I would consider allies and supporters of someone who didn't look like everyone else in the organization or on the team or on the management team, or just as a seller or as a sales assistant. And so, I knew I wasn't one of the only ones, but you have to find other voices that can maybe tell their own sort of stories. And along the way, I found a lot of similarities, in other people's stories, which I think is fantastic, because even, for me, where I'm at in my career now, I still feel inspired by the guests that we talk to, and there's always something new that you learn. So I imagine, like, what if I rewound, back to when I was much younger and much earlier in my career, what could a kind of impact would that have had, on top of having great supporters within organizations that said, take a chance on this kid, or give this guy a shot, bring him into a complex meeting. He should be in the boardroom with us. Take him on a difficult sales call. Get him on the phone with a client who's happy or one that's unhappy. Take him to that important lunch. Go to a conference. Meet other people. So I was thinking, all these folks that can tell their own stories, and now it's become such a great resource. We hear it from so many people of all levels in their career, and from many different sort of categories of business, or different types of organizations. I'm really happy with that decision.
Got it. And like starting out, you guys looked at kind of the ad tech community as the guest initially. Makes perfect sense. That's your backgrounds. You're very well connected in that industry. But within that, like, I'm curious how you went about deciding who you wanted on. It seems like having Steph Laser from News Corp on the first episode. She's a great person, obviously one of the smartest executives in the industry, also one of the most powerful voices. I feel like she's one of those, kind of like, Mark Pritchard on the advertiser side. When Steph talks about something in ad tech, people listen, change happens. But how have you thought about, like, the guests that you brought on, especially as you were getting started with the podcast? Kerel, maybe we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, sure. I think you hit it right on the head there in terms of uh, going after people that we were familiar with, right, in our industry, right? And so again, Steph, someone that we both know, started out with her, but I think it was a combination of finding people that that we knew at first, finding people that were willing to share their story, and then also with a combination of someone that does have a powerful voice, right? I think that's where we started the foundation of going after folks in the ad tech space. And then, you know, as the podcast evolved, as Erik and I got more comfortable with the show itself, as we got more comfortable with being the host of the podcast, right, and it started to grow. I think that's where we branched out, right, and that's where the evolution of, you know, focusing on individuals just in ad tech to now focusing on media, business, and technology. Erik, feel free to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many more voices to go,
Yeah.
and that's still even within, ad tech and advertising, and I also think about how, some of our early decisions too. Again, we wanted to, you know, talk to mothers in the industry. You know what I mean? We wanted to talk to uh, people who just brought something unique that you just never really heard of, or you've seen others fail miserably to try to cover. Whether it was on a panel or whether it was at a conference, and it just didn't work out the way I think folks who really sort of go through a lot of those things like would expect to see. And so I think about a lot of the guests to come as well. We have a number of folks that are already lined up, and it's really exciting to think about how it's really now much broader, but yet you can actually talk about the same subjects and the same about the same topics, pardon me, and then actually have people go through the same experiences outside of what we do every single day.
Got
Yeah,
it.
and Erik, I think you touched on something there that I think admittedly we probably struggled with a little bit at the beginning, but I think we're getting better now, which is because we are covering such a wide range of diverse people that we want on the show, right? When you think about people of color, when you think about women, when you think about the LGBTQ community, right? That's a wide range of diverse, underrepresented groups. And so I think one of the things that Erik and I try to do is make sure that we are consistently having guests on that represent those groups across the board and not just focusing on one particular area. And I think we've gotten better at that over time.
Got it. And speaking of guests, we have a question in the chat about the guests, and I'll mention if anyone in the audience has a question for Kerel or Erik, feel free to use the Q&A function. I'll be able to see those questions. We'll be able to ask them live. This question's from Anthony Laredo, and the question is, how challenging is it to find guests from minority communities? Do you think other trade industry podcasts have a challenge finding similar types of guests? Erik, I'll start with you. Has that been a challenge?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a challenge at all, really. If anything, I wish we could cover more, and I know Kerel feels the same. I mean, we're very happy with what we do in the platform we've created, but the reality is we're not covering it all, and we know it. But I think though that what we're doing can also help to spark and inspire and create other great shows that where they can create. I mean, they can cover other guests as well. I've seen it happen already. So Kerel and I have seen other shows start to spring up that are interested in covering the same topics. And I think that's awesome. And then we also have seen, other great, sort of audio and video shows start to use the same questions that we would ask guests. And we know where it comes from. That's awesome too. We love it, So in terms of finding guests, it hasn't been difficult. I can't really speak to, I think, some of the other industries, but I imagine, and when we think about other industries, certainly within advertising, we're not the only ones. You know what I mean? I think you could look to finance, you can look to a number of other Hollywood. You can look to another industry and find that you're going to have plenty of people there who are going to be willing to tell their stories too.
Right. And you've had some great guests on the podcast. So we have some clips, and I'll tee one up right now. You had Ashley McGee from Amazon on the podcast, and what she was talking about was really kind of what inspired her was to be an example for others who looked like her. So I think we have a clip from Ashley that we'll play right now.
Ashley, I'm always curious about where folks draw their inspiration from.
Yeah.
In our business, there's so many different places where inspiration is really drawn from. Tell us about what sort of creates your energy. Where does this passion come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, and again, I want to send my congratulations to you guys for doing this. And this is where my answer comes from. Because I am a minority in this space, I'm a female, I'm African American, and I'm the age that I am. I'm not expected to be in the position that I've been within my company and within the career. My inspiration comes from people in my neighborhood that I grew up with that look up to me and say, wow, how did you get there? My inspiration comes from future generations. If I go back and do a conversation at my high school or at my college, and people are really wowed that they could see someone that looks like them in the position where I am, and also where I can see my future career going. And so I want to continue to succeed so that I can continue opening doors for those people that I know that are coming behind me, but also I'm representing a group of people that might not necessarily fit in if you just look at the landscape of the industry and say, if I can do it, you can do it. And that really drives me.
Erik, it sounds like you were the one who asked that question.
Yeah.
I imagine that's a fairly common, question that you have with folks that come on the podcast, and
Sure.
common sentiment that's probably shared.
Yeah, and I mean, Ashley, we absolutely love Ashley, and when at the time, she was already an executive at one of the largest media companies in the entire country, and now, she's at Amazon again, climbing, doing amazing things. You know, what she described, I can connect with directly. I know that feeling, whether it's from family or whether it's people where you grew up and the community that you're in, and I know that many others can too. And I think what's awesome about Ashley too, is she's a busy mom. Like she has so much energy. Like she does things in the evening to help others. She serves, and I think it's interesting thinking about someone who has so much energy, so little time, and gives back to the community, and knows very much how much that community has helped her find that sort of inspiration. And I also think, to just extend it, and that's about Ashley, but I know that Ashley has been surrounded by awesome people too, and people who, really brought her, like I was telling you, go and be with people and bring them into environments that, sometimes Kerel and I wouldn't see other people like that looked like us, and so I think of some of her coworkers and some of her bosses she worked with that I know were very, very influential, and you know who you are out there, and I think that knowing those sorts of things can really, really help people as they climb in their career. Love Ashley; it's great.
Right. And as you mentioned, Ashley, at a big company, is now at a very, very big company at Amazon. Kerel, I'm curious, like, because I could see people, these executives who are at the bigger company, I could understand if they would be hesitant to come on and have an open discussion about what their experience has been like, and say something where others that they work with may feel a certain way, or just maybe hesitant about, like, oh, is this something we really want to be digging into? Because if an exec from company X is talking about these issues, is that going to put a target on us where reporters at Digiday are going to start investigating whether we're doing things when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? But what's been your experience with those execs from the bigger companies and their willingness to come on and have that open discussion?
It's been pretty awesome, actually. I mean, in all honesty, we've only had one episode that we've recorded that we actually couldn't publish because the person couldn't get approval internally, right? And so, and I won't go too much more into that. But outside of that, there hasn't been any sort of red tape or anything like that. It's been great. And just going back to Ashley for a second, thinking about that episode. That was the second episode that we recorded. That was the one right after Steph Laser. So you're talking about an episode from 2 years ago, and I think what Ashley was saying in there about opening doors, but also setting an example for the generation that's coming behind her. Right? There's a intersectionality play there, right? Because Ashley talked about it. She's a woman. She's a Black woman, and she was a young senior person at the company. So when she speaks and she talks about setting an example and opening for doors, right? There are many groups of people who are looking at her sort of for that guidance and as an example, which I think is pretty cool and important as well to mention.
Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of execs at big company, I'll queue up another clip. You guys interviewed Kirk McDonald from Xandr, and I mean, Xandr being part of Warner Media, big media company, which is then part of AT&T, huge telecom company. He seemed to be pretty frank and honest with his conversation. So we'll play that clip now.
Mentioned some of the early days, in advertising. And did you ever personally experience any moments where you didn't feel like, a part of the group or discrimination or anything like that?
I'm about to chuckle out loud. Did I ever feel?
Yeah. It's amazing. All of our,
Yeah,
and
it happened way too often, and I've said this in past when I've been talked about this, where I get emotional if I think back to, being in international marketing and having something said that was not like sensitive or about who I was, or even working with people who I know to be really giving, generous people with their time and energy and their commitments, but them being unconscious of the biases that they expressed in a joke or a comment. And I wasn't an overly sensitive person, but when you're the only person at a sales conference in Palm Springs in the early 2000s, at a 5-star hotel and restaurant, and I'll leave all the brands out to be safe, and you're the only person in that restaurant that is of your skin complexion, that is not working there as a bell person or as a cleanup person, you already have, your nerves are on edge, right? And this sense of not being supposed to be in the room, right? Which is captured in so many books about and articles about imposter syndrome, has been, unfortunately, for not just me, but for many, a part of our narrative, our professional narrative.
Powerful.
Yeah. So, I mean, Kirk was super honest there. And I imagine like pretty powerful for listeners to be able to hear like someone like Kirk McDonald, who's ascended, pretty high in the ranks at this point, that, it wasn't always like that for him. Kerel, what did you take away from that conversation with Kirk?
Yeah, I think part of that conversation is just him sharing his experience, and like I talked about earlier, very similar experiences for me, right? So it on some level, it's refreshing to hear someone else kind of struggle with the same things that I've struggled with as well too, right? The other thing, which I think is super important too, he talked about sort of comments that maybe some folks have made or unconscious bias, and not letting it slide, addressing it with that person or that individual. And I think that is super important, that especially today, that we can't let comments slide. We can't let actions slide, whether they're done on purpose or not. I think we have to use it as a moment to teach and educate others, as well as a moment of like getting it off of our chest, right? Because there's something to be said for sort of hearing someone say something, or experiencing a level of unconscious bias and then bottling it up. That's not good. That's not healthy either. And so that's really what I took away from that. And that interview with Kirk, I think we recorded that one back in February of this year. So that one is a pretty recent episode.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of like raising those issues, Kerel, I'll start with you, and then Erik, I'd love to get your thoughts too. Just whether you have any advice for people who are just like, I want to raise these issues inside my organization. I'm not sure the best way to go about it in which it would be constructive. And then I'm also curious, like, what advice you have for those on the listening end of that, on the how they should be taking that in, and then the actions they should be taking from that conversation, so that it's not just a conversation that lives in a moment in time.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's super important today for companies is to have employee resource groups and have various employee resource groups, right? I think that that is a great place to have more conversations like this amongst employees, right? And by doing so, you get a chance to get to know a fellow coworker, maybe on a different level, right? And by getting to know a fellow coworker on a different level, I think that that does a couple things. One, there's a level of education there for you, and then I also think there's a level of empathy and understanding and learning what your coworkers may be going through. So I would start there. I think employee resource groups are super important, super valuable for organizations in today's day and age.
Okay. And then
Absolutely.
Eric, as CEO of Media Tradecraft, I'm curious like how you've been able to incorporate that into your company and working with your employees, because you have a pretty diverse workforce, including the leadership team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm fortunate. My co-founder Justin and I, when we set out to create our company, I mean, we wanted it to really reflect what the real world looks like. Number one, and so we have women in leadership roles, and clearly minority business owner, and we work a lot of our team, are people of color, and so I can actually make a direct impact now as an owner, and so can my co-founder, and it's something we're extremely proud of. We've also created an advisory council that looks very different from other advisory councils that you see on people's pages, and a lot of that's by design, because some of the smartest and the most talented and most brilliant people that I learned from happen to be women. They happen to be people of color. They happen to be gay. And I think that all of those things, when we put that together, it makes us so much better. And so I wanted to also sort of touch a little bit on what like Kerel had talked about too, and within organizations, and can you create a safe environment, psychologically, where somebody can be able to express and think and talk and communicate with others. I think that's really important. So I think you can create a culture of belonging and a culture of inclusion, and that makes your organization really show that you care. And I think that's really important. And we had a tremendous guest on talk about some other additional benefits too, and like retention, and the importance of your team and your staff being able to stay with you. You know what I mean? And not sort of leave and say, hey, like maybe this isn't the place where I can have those feelings or think about that or bring up discussions. And so I think there's a lot of there's a lot of great ways to be able to incorporate that into a culture as a company, whether you're small, medium size, or large. The reality is, I think if you can create those environments, you'll benefit quite a bit.
Right. And Kerel, you mentioned employee resource groups. Obviously, those are hugely important, and
Hmm.
companies are creating employee resource groups where it's not just here's our diversity organization, but here's our Black employee resource group, here's our women's employee resource group, Asian, Latinx, LGBTQ, and I'm sure there are many others that are too many to name, hopefully. Um, but I know a frustration sometimes with employees in those employee resource groups is, okay, this is great. We're coming together to talk about what we need, but what's going to come of this? How do we make sure that leadership's not only listening but acting on this? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, one of the things that we actually have recently done at Live Intent is we've created a D&I executive committee, which I happen to be the chair of at this particular point in time. And essentially, we're using that committee to connect the employee resource groups to the senior level, the C-suite of the organization, right? So that while a lot of initiatives are being driven by our employees in those resource groups, there is an executive level sponsorship, right? And there is an executive level, let's call it a level of accountability to make sure that what we're talking about at the company is not just, like you said, not just D&I off in the corner, but how do we make sure that inclusion and belonging is a part of our mission, our values, and really our everyday life at the company.
Right. And I think, speaking of that, I think the conversation you both had with Samande Agosa, who's now at the Not Worldwide, touched on this subject. So we'll cue up that clip right now, where the conversation you had with Samande about the importance of asking, and just, the worst thing that can happen is people say no. So here's that clip.
One of the things you learn if you want to be, in sales, or I think if you really want to aspire in life in general, is not to be afraid to ask.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Not to be afraid to ask, and whether the answer is no, that's fine, but that's the worst you can hear. Right. Is no. The rest can be a conversation that lasts a while. It can be something that turns into quick, or something that turns into something 6 to 12 months from now. And it manifests.
Right.
But if you never ask, it never happened.
That's the worst outcome. Not
Absolutely.
asking. Yeah.
Absolutely. So as far as myself, I try to make myself available to people depending on how much they want to ask. Right? I'm not the guy that's going to offer it all to you.
Yeah.
But if you show a level of interest,
Yep.
and if you ask one or two questions, then I'm free to go back and forth with you.
Yeah.
Right? And free to go back and forth with you, and you want to, keep in contact. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a couple of people that do that, but just not in the space.
Gotcha.
Right, just in general, where we go back and forth because, we want to make sure that we're keeping up with each other in general.
Powerful point. Erik, can you talk about the context of that conversation, and what you all were talking about when Samande made that point?
Yeah, I think what's really great about having Samanda as a guest, there was so much in that conversation, and there was really I think another big piece too, where he talked about the company he was working for. He was nominated and won a big award, right? And he had this opportunity to be able to go to Sweden, and for the first time, he felt and he saw his picture plastered everywhere, right? He had won this great award within the company that recognized his hard work in sales because of what he just sort of talked about and understanding that. And what was tremendous was his coworkers. I mean, this was something that his peers and his coworkers nominated him for, right? And they recognized his talent. And what I think is amazing there, he was really humble, but it created this immense pride, right? And I think that's a direct example of, when a company can recognize and, stand up someone, think of how much harder he worked for his organization, or was celebrated, or did a great job, and he's moved on to, other great things. I think that's a big missing ingredient sometimes within, organizations, is the ability to find a way to tap into a feeling. When we talk about belonging, you feel like you belong there, right? You feel like when all of your peers and everyone around you, accepts you and then recognizes you, that's a matter of the heart. You know what I mean? And I think that's different, and I think it's powerful. And so, our discussion really, like, from the beginning there, again, started with, we've always looked around the room, and nobody sort of looked like us, is really where it started. So, and I know, Kerel, you had some really great pieces that you talked about with him too in there.
Yeah, and I think you raised a good point, Erik, about the story of him receiving that award, right, and really feeling a part of the organization that he was working for at the time. And when you really feel a part of the organization where you're working, when you really feel like you're being included and there's a sense of belonging, that's when you feel like you can be your true self. And when you can be your true self, then that's when you perform the best that you can at your job, right? And I think that was certainly part of the conversation, and where he was going with that. And also just speaking to, if you are at a company and you're a young and up and coming employee, if you want to, ask your company to sponsor you taking a class, or you think you're ready to take on more responsibility, or you want a mentor, or you think you're ready for that next promotion, it is your job to speak up, right? Because what's that old saying, a closed mouth doesn't get fed, right? Like you have to speak up. And so I think that's where he was coming from with that one. And again, that's an earlier episode. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Erik, I think that's one we did in 2018, I believe.
Yeah, it was it was a while ago, and I think too, Tim, it's when you hear powerful stories like that and they're positive, they're inspirational. Kerel and I have experienced that directly in our careers too. Prior to founding my company, I experienced that with the leadership and my management team, the owners of the companies that I worked for. I've had that several times over, right? And Kerel's had that too. And it's important to hear positive outcomes as well, and I think that was just a powerful interview, and I hope everyone gets a chance to hear it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and on a similar note, we have an audience question. In your opinion, what is the best first step for organizations to take in authentically addressing a lack of diversity, mostly across leadership roles, when it has been obviously lacking for so long? Carl, start with you. How would you answer that?
I would say, just like everything else we do in our industry, you got to measure it, right? So I think the first step is understanding your starting point, right? Understanding what level of diversity you have across your organization today, and then setting some benchmarks to improve upon that. And again, there's a lot to that, right? But if you're asking me for a starting point, you gotta understand where you're at today, right? And so I think that's first is like, do you have the data that you can report on and look at to see how diverse your organization is, to then build a plan and set benchmarks and goals to.
Got it. Erik, would you agree on that being the starting point? And if so, like, do you have an
Yeah,
idea of what the second
yeah.
point would be?
No, I believe that's definitely the starting point, and I think it's also what trips up a lot of companies too, because the numbers are ugly. It's hard to look at data that you stare at and you're like, oh my gosh, is it really this? You know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of the thing that's hard, I think, for a lot of companies to really do, is let that data stare at you and sort of burn a hole in you. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I know a lot of organizations, and we're seeing in a lot of companies, do want to make a change and do want to improve things. So you have to start there, and you don't know where to go unless the data is going to sort of, guide you. And I think also it doesn't have to be this huge complex sort of rollout. First is the recognition, taking the data and being able to sort of understand how you start off, and then actually creating a very simple plan. And Kerel mentioned a few of them, some resource groups, and then also, you know, thinking about your interactions, thinking about being reflective. Like, not all of it has to be this outward sort of projection of like, here's what we're going to do. Sometimes you got to look inwards, and start to sort of internalize a lot of that. And then from there, on an individual level or as an organization, be able to start to deliver on what you've internalized. And I think, a lot of that has to do with like something very simple. Does someone, or do you care about the people that you work with? If you can start somewhere there, it's actually quite easy to be able to figure out some of those next
But it's
steps.
not going to happen overnight, right? And I think you raised a great point there, Erik. It's going to take time. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and it's going to take effort. And that's why I say starting out with the data, so that you can set some goals that are measurable, because it is going to take time.
Right. And it's also one of those things where I know a lot of folks, no matter what underrepresented group they're in, can often feel like I'm the one who always has to be doing the work, that has to be pushing for these changes. Why can't leadership take on more of this burden? And this was something that came up in one of the episodes you guys did, when you had Desiree Tunstall from Precision Proposals on, and she really made a strong point on this one. So we have a clip that we'll play just right now.
Desiree, tell us a little bit about your experiences, in the industry, with how maybe the industry can improve, inclusiveness, and how you see it changing.
I think one of the things that's encouraging to an extent, but also frustrating to an extent, is there's so many conversations right now about diversity and inclusion, and there's so many panels, and I'm curious to see if that actually manifests itself into real action.
Yeah.
Because I feel to a certain extent that people complicate this thing to a point that it doesn't need to be that complicated, right? You know, if you have an interest in having a diverse pool of candidates, you cannot go to all of your existing employees who look the same and ask them to refer their friends.
Yeah.
It does not work. It does not work. You are going to have to do a little bit more work and put some elbow grease into finding different types of people. When it's time to go to colleges and recruit, you cannot continue going to the same universities that you've always gone to that have the kind of same demographic of people who historically have come to your organization. You've got to branch out.
I mean, I feel like that just hits it right there on the head of just, it comes down to hiring, getting the people in the door, and then once they're in the door, getting them up the ranks, right? Kerel, what did you make of Desiree's point?
Yeah, I mean, I love that interview, and the point that she made was awesome, right? Because if you think about business today, right? If you are launching a new product or launching a new service and you put it out into the marketplace, and let's say you don't get the adoption that you think that you should have gotten, what do we do as organizations? We pull back, we evaluate the feature set, we look at the strategy, the messaging, and then we pivot, right? Companies need to do the same thing when it comes to recruiting, right? You can't do the same thing over and over. You can't have the same strategy that you've had over and over if you truly want to hire a diverse workforce. But I think the hiring part is just one piece of it, right? There's the retention part, and there's the professional growth and development. So it's what, as organizations, are we doing once you do hire a diverse candidate or a diverse group of people? How are you making sure, going back to the discussion we were having earlier, how are you making sure that they feel a sense of belonging and included in the organization, and feel that they can be their true self every day in the workplace? One other piece of that clip, if we would have let it kept playing, Desiree talks about this term culture fit, right? And in the interview process, evaluating someone on culture fit, she talked about the need for getting rid of that term culture fit, because like, what does that actually mean, culture fit? And it shouldn't be this sort of blanket term culture fit, because that can mean different things for different people, right? You should be evaluating people really on their merits. Can they do the job? And are they going to bring to the table a different viewpoint or a different vantage point that maybe isn't within the organization? I mean, me personally, that's one of the reasons why I love bringing in new people into my marketing team, right? Because they bring a breath of fresh air and a different perspective that maybe we didn't already have within our group.
Got it. And Kerel, Erik, sorry, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Kerel hits right on the head, and Desiree obviously knocked it out of the park. And I mean, personal account, and I think this is why it's important. We tell our stories too, that professional growth piece that Kerel is talking about. At every step of my in my career, I had that, right? So I've had every single one of my bosses, everybody has been a contributor, and they let me be myself. They empowered me to be almost a pseudo disruptor within every one of the organizations that I've worked for. Early on in my career, I was, a young digital guy in a print world. That was disruptive in-house, right? As budgets were sort of changing, but we had to build that digital enterprise. Going to startup, I was disrupting something within a radio organization as the digital entities, and that was, but I had to have people empower me and develop me professionally and let me be myself and execute all of those things. Same thing at the last organization, changing how, the sort of legacy IO model into programmatic and all the connected ad technologies, disruptive again, and so having people empower you and really support you and help you grow and nurture you is critical, and I think that's an important piece that goes along with the hiring piece, and that goes along with all the other great points. So
another thing that's interesting too about the 4 clips that we just played, and just thinking about this, really about all the guests that we've had on is they're not just talking about these things, they're actually doing things, whether that's inside of their organization or outside of their organization, right? Samande talked about being a mentor to others. Kirk is heavily involved with a number of organizations, one of them being mouse.org, which educates and empowers students around STEM, right? Um, uh, Ashley is a crisis counselor at nighttime, right? That was something that we didn't talk about. Desiree, we didn't talk about this either, but she started Black Birthright, which is a program that takes Black high school kids here in America on trips to Africa. So they're all doing things and very passionate about this subject and not just talking about it.
Tremendous.
And speaking of doing things, Kerel, you had made the point that it's not just about hiring, but once you have people inside the organization, developing them, growing them. And that's been something I've been doing a lot of reporting on what media companies are doing around diversity and inclusion. And what's come out from a lot of the ERGs inside media companies is we need better professional development. What's the career pathing? What's the path to leadership positions? As companies are trying to put their action plans together and really trying to set goals that are actionable, where you can evaluate against them a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, 3 years from now. What advice do you have for companies on how they can set those goals when it comes to professional development?
Yeah, I think that they need to be set at the corporate level, but also at the departmental level, right? I'll give you an example of something that we do within my team at Live Intent, mainly because I just presented on it this morning, so it's top of mind. So we, our team, we have OKRs, right? We have quarterly goals, right? And we have four main objectives, right? Three of them are really based on supporting the company's vision, mission, and revenue goals, right? But the fourth KR that we have is an internal one for the marketing team, and it's called Practice Your Craft, right? And that one is all about the professional development of the individuals within marketing, right? So whether that's attending a conference or the marketing book club that we have, or something along those lines, right? What are we doing to help further people's career, right? Because there is a sort of individual, obviously, benefit to that, right? Person growing, but there's also a company benefit to that, right? If you can, grow people professionally and they feel a sense of belonging and inclusion within the organization, that's great for the company. They're going to want that employee is going to want to stay longer. They're going to help contribute to the bottom line more effectively, right? And those are all great things, because what happens when you have a revolving door and employees are constantly leaving? You're constantly in this cycle of training, and that's not good for the growth of an organization or the individuals there. So I hope that answered your question a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. And I imagine it can vary company to company as well.
Yeah.
We only have a few minutes left. I want to talk a little bit, about the podcast and how it fits into all of this right now. It seems like the podcast kind of I'm sure it serves multiple purposes, but it seems like for listeners, it can serve kind of two different purposes. If I'm a member of the underrepresented community, there's a therapeutic aspect of hearing others who have experiences that are similar to mine, knowing that I'm not alone. And then for those white people, let's say it, listening in, and they're just like, I wasn't aware of this. This is educational for me. How do you guys think about that, Erik? How do you think about like the different purposes that the podcast can serve for the listeners?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it can serve a lot of different ways. And again, keeping it simple. It's it's complex subject matter, right? But everything that anyone can contribute, whether it's small or whether it's large, to make a difference, it matters. And that's why I think, even if it's simply reflecting and again being a little more internal with your thoughts, and you hear perspectives that maybe you didn't think about, maybe you go back to work, or you go amongst your friends, or you go out to your family, or wherever it may be, and you just look at things differently, or you feel something differently, and that can even be a contribution to it, right? And so sometimes it begins with listening. more than even just sort of talking and going out and doing, And so I think that there's a lot of questions that, white people are asking themselves around, what's happening in society, right? And so if this is a way to be able to connect feelings, emotions, or spark ideas, I think it's all good. There is no bad that comes from it. And then that's something I'm really proud of Kerel. And we can't be more thankful and grateful for all the listeners and all the guests and all the ones to come. Because if we can contribute, this is our way of contributing, then we feel really, really good about it.
And then Kerel, we mentioned at the top, you guys started off with people from the ad tech community, but you've expanded out the guests to people from media, people from technology. I'm curious, like as you guys have expanded out and look to expand out more, how that brings in different perspectives, because a lot of this stuff is universal. Whatever industry people are in, they're going to be dealing with these issues. But I imagine there can be different wrinkles in the different industries.
Yeah, there certainly can, and I think as we've expanded out, right, I think the talk track or the questions that we ask are the same, but the responses that we get back vary greatly, right? And I think we're starting to see even more of that because we are expanding out again to media, business, and technology, and we've had people on that are sort of chief business officers at very large organizations. We've had people on that have started their own venture capital funds, a wide range of people, and it's great to get that different perspective. I think it's great for the audience to hear different perspectives from people in different industries and figure out how it relates to them. And to Erik's point earlier, right, like using this as a reference point for advice and to help spark ideas, I think is super important.
And then lastly, just to get us sparking ideas, I'm a big fan of just putting things out in the universe, letting things manifest. Curious, like who, and this is a question that had come from the audience, who you guys have as a dream guest or guest on the podcast. Kerel, I see a big smile on your face. Who are you thinking of?
Because I have a wide range of interests and I like to go as big as possible. Can I give you three names?
Absolutely.
All right. So first one, because of all the speaking out that he does and some of the things that he does back in his own community, so on and so forth. LeBron James would be an awesome guest. I'm going big. All right. I would love to have on the lady who ran for governor in Georgia. So Stacey Abrams, I think would be a fantastic conversation. And then there's a guy by the name of Tristan Walker who started company Bevel. I would love to have him on. So those would be my three fantasy guests, I guess. If
that's a great list. That's some pressure on you, Erik.
Yeah.
Who you got on your list?
Well, look, here's the reality, and I feel we're so lucky that we've had a couple of folks that were already sort of in our dream bucket. So that's awesome. Check number one. That's there's a couple there already. So that's fantastic. And I'm working on a small list already privately, which I know we're going to have them come on. So, and they know who they are. I'm in your inbox already. So, but I'd love to keep concentrating too. Kerel's got the big ones. They're going to happen too. But there's a few folks that are still within our industry that I know have already been championing, and been working hard, on a lot of different issues, and I'd love to have them come on in the near future. So you'll see a follow-up message from me in your inbox, awesome. Or on LinkedIn, or on Twitter, or on.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're fortunately out of time. I would have kept you guys on for hours, but people do not have that much time, even though they have more time these days than usual. But Kerel, Erik, thanks so much. This is fantastic.
Thank you, Tim. And again, thanks to the whole Digiday team for having us on. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks.